On this edition of the Correspondents, the race for the White House in 2016. A vast field of Republican candidates have been slugging it out for months, and yet one man continues to lead the polls. For the Democrats, a different story. Hillary Clinton has been the leading candidate for months, but an upstart from Vermont may be challenging her supremacy. And 2016 marks President Barack Obama's final full year in the White House. We take a look at the challenges still ahead and the legacy he leaves behind. And Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Mil Arcega, and welcome to the Correspondents' first show of 2016 on Voice of America. Well, Republican presidential contender Donald Trump continues to lead in public opinion polls in the race for the Republican nomination for U.S. president. Mr. Trump has dominated what was, in 2015, a most unusual U.S. election cycle. Here's VOA national correspondent Jim Malone.
Donald Trump remains the central figure in the U.S. presidential race, drawing enthusiastic support from conservative Republicans looking for change and worried about the threat of terrorism.
The American dream is dead, but I'm going to make it bigger and better and stronger than ever before. I'm going to do it.
Trump continues to lead both national and key state polls, even after he set off a firestorm with his proposal to ban Muslims coming to the U.S. The plan drew condemnation from Democrats and Republicans alike, including Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell.
So this suggestion is completely and totally inconsistent with American values.
And joining me now for more on the race for the White House in 2016, VOA national correspondent Jim Malone, who of course filed that report for us, and also in our Washington studio, VOA congressional correspondent Cindy Saine. Welcome to both of you. It's good to have both of you on for the first show of the year. It's going to be a huge year, right, Jim? but already, I don't say that properly, but already we're seeing some movement in the GOP camp. It seems like Senator Ted Cruz may be gaining in on Donald Trump's lead, at least in national polls.
Well, as we approach the critical 4 or 5 weeks ahead, where we actually start voting February 1st in Iowa, and then 8 days later in New Hampshire, at the top of the field, we see Trump holding his place. We see Ted Cruz moving up, the conservative senator from Texas. Both of them are considered, by the way, political outsiders, people who would shake up Washington. Trump in particular is kind of a mix of a protest candidate, entertainer, self-made man who cannot be bought. I think this is one of the underlying strengths he has. He's not really doing much on fundraising, doesn't have to, and this is one of the bits of his appeal to conservative voters right now.
But Cindy's saying Trump's numbers seem to be falling in part because he's not very popular with women these days, especially after some recent vulgar comments that he directed at Hillary Clinton. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's right, Mil. He commented on Hillary Clinton taking a toilet break at a debate and said it was disgusting. And he also used a word which I won't repeat for saying how she lost to President Obama, a rather vulgar word. And Hillary Clinton, I think, made a wise decision saying she's not going to respond to every comment, but her press person said that all women recognize that these remarks are degrading. And Mrs. Clinton did say that Donald Trump seems to have a penchant for insulting women. And as Jim said, his campaign appearances seem to be a little bit of a stand-up routine. And he takes whatever it is and sort of goes with it, and it seems half serious maybe or not serious, and some people are loving it, and they're just say they're fed up with everyone having to be so politically correct. And I think perhaps Hillary Clinton is a polarizing figure, and people who really dislike her may like even women, perhaps, him saying these things. But a lot of women will say, this is basically potty level talk, like schoolyard level talk from a major presidential contender.
I mean, Jim Malone, can he win without the women's vote? I mean, he seems to be alienating quite a few of them.
Well, we have to look at two things. He's running for the Republican nomination, and so far you can come up with a long list of outrageous comments he has made and what has happened. most of the time his poll ratings have gone up, including after the proposed Muslim ban. And in fact, toward the end of the year, we had a CNN poll which had him at 39%, Cruz at 18%. So in some polls, he continues to have a double-digit lead on the Republican field. The issue for Republicans, for the party, is if he wins the nomination, what kind of general election candidate would he be against most likely Hillary Clinton? And isn't he setting himself up for a party loss now by making these outrageous comments? The only thing I'll say about that is it has been predicted time and again by the experts since July that Trump would self-destruct. Well, it's January now, and what are we talking about? Donald Trump's still leading.
We're all wrong, right?
So far.
So far. But here's another new poll that came out. A national poll says that of all Americans interviewed, about 50% of them would be very embarrassed to have Donald Trump as president. What does that tell us about this, about Trump as a general election candidate?
Well, the flip side is that 50% then would not be embarrassed, which is interesting in of itself. But I think, as Jim said, it's very interesting to see if he does win the nomination, or if Cruz wins the nomination, will either of them go to the middle? Trump has, for most of his life, been very friendly to Democratic politics, so that we'll have to watch
so there's some of that distrust. Now we're talking about these outsider candidates, Ted Cruz and Donald Trump. What about folks like Rubio and folks like Jeb Bush? You can't write those guys off.
No, this is the part of the story that we really don't know is how it's going to unfold. Because look, yes, the Trump, the Cruz faction, they're outsiders. They appeal to hard rock conservative voters. But there's still an element in the Republican Party that's sizable, the Mitt Romney type voters, John McCain, the last two nominees. They're looking at people like Marco Rubio, like Jeb Bush, Chris Christie, and John Kasich. What we don't see yet is one person from that faction evolving to be the challenger to the Trump-Cruz sort of wing of the party. But that's where the primaries, the early voting will kind of decide that, especially in New Hampshire, the state that votes second, the site of the first presidential primary. We've seen Chris Christie rising of late. So that could be something to watch because so far Jeb Bush has not been able to get out of the low single digits. He's kind of a foil for Donald
this
Trump.
Low energy label.
No, right. Trump has been able to go after him. He went after Lindsey Graham early, and now Lindsey Graham has left the race, Graham being one of the foremost hawks in the race. So what you have to think in terms of the Republican voting is in certain lanes that they're going to start to decide as they vote. The conservative lane, Iowa gets a big say in that. That's where Cruz is doing well, and Trump. But in New Hampshire, usually moderates come to the fore. Let's see who emerges as sort of the moderate answer to Donald Trump.
And Cindy, looking at the larger GOP base, has this election cycle hurt the GOP brand? I mean, amongst immigrants, amongst Latinos, amongst women, how badly has this primary race damaged the credibility, I suppose, of the GOP?
Well, I think it has, and since Trump has been getting so much of the attention, and he has alienated Hispanic voters with very negative comments about Mexicans, he's made some sort of questionable comments about Jews. Of course, the ban on Muslims, said derogatory things about multiple women. You're starting, he even made fun of one disabled journalist, so you're starting to wonder which group has he not picked on yet. So I've got to think that if he is the nominee, that is going to hurt the party. And Cruz doesn't play very well with most sort of moderate women because some of the comments that he's made about birth control and other things.
Jim Malone, you've covered a lot of election cycles. Is this race been an unusual one?
Yeah, it's very unpredictable. There's that real hot kind of button anger, impatience with Washington we see in the Republican primaries that both Trump and Cruz are tapping into. How that plays out into the general election, we don't know. Is this just a minority of a minority that's going to have a voice, or is this something broader? I will say this. Most of the time after a two-term presidency, there is a desire for change in the public. We already see signs of that. That's something that Hillary Clinton is going to have to deal with as she looks to be the Democratic nominee and be a strong general election candidate. But that anger on the right, that kind of fierceness is there. Trump has shown it's there. The big immediate question is, will all those folks start voting in the primaries that will keep Trump at the top of the polls, or are they going to look to alternatives? We won't know till the voting begins.
Well, I'm glad you raised the other side, because that's exactly what we're talking about next. Thank you, Jim and Cindy. We're going to take a break right now, but you two don't go anywhere. We want to come back in just a moment to get your thoughts on the Democratic Party's choices and who they think will be next to occupy the Oval Office. This is The Correspondents on Voice of America. And welcome back to The Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. Well, this week's program takes a special look at the race for the White House in 2016 and in the ongoing battle for the Latino vote. The 2016 Democratic presidential candidates recently held their own sort of debate on immigration and refugee policies. It's an important issue and an important demographic for these candidates. Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, and Martin O'Malley each addressed pro-immigrant activists in New York on that issue. Here's VOA's Ramon Taylor with that part of the election 2016 story.
In her address, former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton called out the Republican field for missed opportunities.
Not a single Republican candidate, not one, clearly and consistently supports a real path to citizenship. Now, you know, Senator Rubio actually helped write the 2013 immigration bill. Now he renounces it. They're all moving toward the extreme and away from the rest of America.
Unlike Clinton, who focused most of her attention on the Republican field, Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders and long-shot candidate former Maryland Governor Martin O'Malley both centered on their Democratic rivals. On 2014's issue of unaccompanied minors crossing into the U.S. from Central America to escape crime and lack of opportunity, Sanders took aim at Clinton.
I was appalled that so many voices, including some within the Democratic Party, were insisting that large numbers of immigrant children at the border caught in a humanitarian crisis be sent back.
Clinton has defended the policy of returning minors, arguing it would deter families from sending their children alone on a dangerous journey. Martin O'Malley, who trails both Clinton and Sanders, used the platform to tout his own record on immigration reform as governor of Maryland. He scolded his Democratic rivals for placing politics before principle.
We're not going to achieve the deeper understanding necessary to pass comprehensive immigration reform or to shut down the deplorable practice of these expanding immigrant detention camps in our country by taking our cues from our pollsters.
And that report by VOA's Ramon Taylor. As you've already seen, the Democratic field of candidates for 2016 is considerably smaller. Only 3 are vying for their party's nomination. And taking a look at that side of the political equation, we're joined again by VOA national correspondent Jim Malone and congressional correspondent Cindy Saine. Thank you both for sticking around. Cindy, I'm going to start with you. You know, for years we've been talking about how our immigration system in this country is broken. Politicians have tried for years to make some sense of it, but is politics getting in the way of immigration reform, substantial immigration reform that would answer some of these issues?
Well, Mil, certainly since this is an election year, it's going to be even more impossible to get anything done. But to be honest, it has been the case for quite some time that the Republican Party has been divided on this issue. Most Democrats do want a path to citizenship and would like to have a major comprehensive immigration reform law passed in Congress. The Senate actually passed it a couple years ago. The House, which has a Republican majority, has never even brought it up for a debate. So it will not come up for debate, and the new Speaker Ryan has said that it won't come up for debate.
It keeps going nowhere, and it almost seems like after all is said and done, it might become just another empty campaign promise. Is this a good strategy for Democrats to campaign for the Latino vote?
Well, I think so, because it's a key part of their voting coalition that they will need to win in 2016, as they did with Barack Obama twice. One of the surprises I found this year in the election cycle is that we perhaps have underestimated the opposition of the right on the immigration issue, to the point that Marco Rubio, who's seen by many as a leading sort of establishment or center figure to rise up in the polls for the Republican field, has a problem with immigration because he supported an immigration bill back in 2013. And he's being dogged about that by his Republican rivals. This is an issue that really cleaves the two parties. It's almost to the point where on the Republican side, you really have to be politically correct about not even have ever supported some sort of amnesty type thing. The Democrats are going to use that. They're going to really hammer away at that all through this coming year.
Which is what makes this whole election cycle so interesting. But getting back to the Democratic side of things, it's been Hillary Clinton basically from day one. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has sort of established a little bit of a rallying cry there. He does have his followers. But is there any reason for these other two, Bernie Sanders and Martin O'Malley, to actually stick around? I mean, it doesn't seem like the numbers are changing all that much, and Hillary remains right on top. Do you think that's going to stay?
Well, she does, but I think Bernie Sanders, I just took a peek at some of the poll averages, and Hillary Clinton is at 55, Bernie Sanders is at around 30, Martin O'Malley is down like at 4. So I think Bernie Sanders certainly should stay in the race, and he's actually leading right now in New Hampshire.
Yeah, that's the thing. In the early states, he's within striking distance in Iowa. He's ahead in New Hampshire by most accounts, so there's no reason for him to leave now. He's tapped into a vein of progressive kind of dissatisfaction on the left of the Democratic Party. Whether that's enough to undermine Hillary Clinton, maybe not. Clinton has had a good few months. Her testimony on the Benghazi Commission before Congress. The focus now on terrorism and national security probably helps her a lot. Sanders keeps trying to pivot away from those issues to talk about income inequality, but clearly the polls have shown that in recent months Americans are much more concerned with security issues. That's been helping Clinton.
That will help Clinton, yes, you're saying. So. Okay. Yeah. Well, what about the president's popularity? It seems to be dropping. Is that going to hurt Hillary Clinton?
Well, you know, it's in the mid-40s favorable, around 50% unfavorable. Barack Obama, that's kind of his place he's been for a while, to be quite honest. That's not great, though, if you're looking to be his successor in the Democratic Party. You'd like to see a little bit more favorability, because I think right now that signifies people may be looking for change in 2016. So here's the great dilemma now, I think, for Hillary Clinton. She wants to please those Democrats who want a continuation of some or most Obama policies, but she may need to show some differences, especially to win over more moderate voters, independents in the middle, that she will need to win the presidency in 2016. So she's going to have a bit of a balancing act going forward, I think.
Sidney, does this serve the Democratic Party well to have Bernie Sanders there sort of pushing the party a little bit more to the left?
I think so, and as Jim pointed out, when he started out and he was talking mainly about income inequality, that the system is rigged, you know, that Wall Street and 1% of the population is getting all the money and everything, and that appealed especially to a lot of young people. And I think that if there ever were to be a potential matchup, let's say, between Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump, it would be interesting, because Trump certainly can't portray Bernie Sanders as not being for the little guy. He has always been for the little guy. But I think now, as Jim said, after the Paris attacks and the San Bernardino attacks, the focus has shifted to national security in a big way, and Sanders needs to pivot, and he hasn't done that.
And Clinton needs to be careful, and she is being careful about not really attacking Sanders that much. She needs those supporters who are revved up to come out and vote for her later in the primaries and then in the general election. And listen, Clinton's in a different place than she was earlier in 2015 because of the email controversy and all that. The focus was on her baggage. In recent months, it's moved away from that. That's a good thing for her. In fact, the Republican spotlight, I think, is helping her, too. It allows her to draw a general contrast with those Republican candidates, especially people like Donald Trump and Ted Cruz.
Always fascinating talking politics with the two of you. We'll be right back. But thank you, Jim and Cindy. We're taking another break right now. But when we come back, we'll look at the man who currently sits in the White House, what's in store for him in the final year of his second term, and how will historians view the legacy of President Obama? That's next. But first, a reminder, we want to hear from you. Share your thoughts, questions, and comments on our Facebook page. The address is VOA The Correspondents. We'll be right back.
Hamilton Live is a live audience performance. With live music, you have that interaction. There's nothing like getting that immediate feedback from the folks that you're performing to. They feel it and they respond back to you. You see it in their eyes. You know that you're connecting with them. Like if any form of communication, it's that response that you get back.
Wherever you are, Voice of America is on air, reaching more than 130 million weekly, worldwide, in more than 40 languages. Online, social media, and breaking news from around the world. On the go, dozens of new features on popular platforms with new apps and trending topics. Voice of America, on air, online, on the go.
And welcome back to the Correspondents on Voice of America. I'm Mil Arcega in Washington. Well, with the arrival of 2016, U.S. President Barack Obama now enters his final full year in office. Mr. Obama says keeping the country safe and combating Islamic State militants will be among his top priorities. The president laid out his agenda during a recent press conference. White House correspondent Mary Alice Salinas was there.
Defeating the Islamic State militant group and protecting the homeland from attacks like the one carried out in San Bernardino by a self-radicalized couple. These are among President Barack Obama's top priorities in 2016.
Well, we're going to defeat ISIS. And we're going to do so by systematically squeezing them, cutting off their supply lines, cutting off their financing, taking out their leadership, taking out their forces, taking out their infrastructure.
At his annual year-end briefing, Obama said international talks on a political solution in Syria are also critical.
To find a political transition that maintains the Syrian state, that recognizes there are a bunch of stakeholders inside of Syria, and hopefully to initiate a ceasefire that won't be perfect, but allows all the parties to turn on what should be our number one focus, and that is destroying Daesh and its allies in the region.
Now that report from Mary Alice Salinas. And I'm joined in the studio by correspondent Aru Pandi, who also covers the White House for us at VOA. And Jim Malone has kindly agreed to stick around for another segment. So let's talk about the Obama presidency. But before I even get to the challenges and the legacy, Aru, I want to talk to you about what this president has been able to accomplish just in 2015 alone.
It's been a huge year. If you just talk on face value, some of the big ticket items. We had the Iran nuclear agreement that was done, and then we had the normalization of ties with Cuba, which was huge, and then we had the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, and then most recently the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Yes, that was 200 nations signing on, but it was widely said that it was President Obama's leadership and the U.S. leadership that helped really get everyone on board on climate change. So. On face value, you saw a lot of huge, big deals happening. And also, I mean, he's always pushed for diplomacy. And you saw that firsthand, not just with Cuba, but with Iran. And that diplomacy works. And this is how we deal with countries like Cuba and Iran. So.
And Jim, it's interesting because a lot of people were predicting that this is going to be the part of the lame duck session of the president's final 2 years. He did manage to accomplish a lot. And then Paris happened. And then San Bernardino happened.
I think that's significant, too, because I think we're seeing the challenge of reassuring people about terrorism here. And there's been some criticism of the way he's gone about that and whether it's been effective. And this is an issue that's not going to go away. Certainly the Republicans in the presidential race are hammering away at President Obama on a range of topics. But this new focus on security and terrorism is something that they've really honed in on.
It sort of puts a microscope on the flaws of the presidency.
Absolutely. I think if you didn't have the most recent attacks, San Bernardino and Paris, and we've always had Syria there. It's been going on for several years. You've seen the refugee crisis stemming from that. But it's always been a distance. Now terrorism is coming home. And I think had those two attacks not happened so close to the end of the year, you would have looked on this past year differently in terms of the what President Obama's legacy will be and also what he can accomplish next year. But I think Syria, the refugee crisis, now domestic terrorism, radicalization, those are all kind of have overshadowed.
And I think American voters are connecting a lot of these dots, and it increases the stakes and the challenge for President Obama, because I think there's not a lot of confidence, at least according to the polls right now, in his, what you might say, a measured, even though he's talking about intensified approach to deal with Islamic State. Because people are directly tying the threat of the Islamic State to domestic terrorism. They're also tying it, whether they have grounds or not, to admitting Syrian refugees. A new poll out shows that people, a slight majority, don't want to admit the Syrian refugees right now, even if they don't agree with Trump's ban on Muslims. So there's some challenges moving forward here that he's going to face in the last year of his presidency.
And I think that criticism has come from that, his overuse of diplomacy and underuse of military force. People have said, well, he wasn't at forceful. There should have been a more forceful intervention in Syria. I mean, there's so many different factors with the Syrian crisis that I don't think there's a quote magic bullet that would have said, okay, had we put troops in and done this and done that. But he's been very clear. I'm not going to reinvade a country, but I think some critics say there's a middle ground. We're not talking about an invasion of Syria. We're not talking about a invasion of Iraq, but perhaps a more, but you've seen now in the last few weeks, he's come out and addressed the American public at least 5 times in the last 3 weeks.
Reassure them.
To reassure, to say, look, I'm on top of this, we're on top of this, we're going to do all that we can to prevent a large-scale attack. But those smaller attacks, the radicalization factor, that's something that's very difficult, and he has acknowledged that.
And this is just the latest thing to hit the Obama presidency, but he doesn't seem to catch much of a break. I mean, you got to remember, this president entered in 2008 facing the worst financial crisis. He doesn't get a lot of credit for that. He's blamed instead for Syria, for Libya, and for all the security issues.
Well, he also faced a determined opposition from the start. Remember the famous comment about Mitch McConnell, the Republican Senate leader, saying their #1 goal was to defeat him for re-election. They didn't succeed there. I go back, though, the arc of President Obama's career, starting in 2004 when he emerged on the scene, he wanted to present himself as sort of a national healing candidate, a bringing together. And part of his legacy will be judged on that basis, and it's been difficult. The country is divided. Even in a recent interview, he acknowledged he's not been able to bridge those differences as much as he might like. He talked about wanting to do away with red states, blue states. But the fact is, the country remains divided in camps. Democrats are generally happy with his legacy. Republicans are trying to use it against him now to recapture the White House in 2016.
Go ahead.
But I think that's also the reason why the last year or so, or last 2 years, he's like, you know what, I'm going to do what I think is important. He's doing criminal justice reform. He's still plugging ahead with wanting to close Guantanamo Bay. So he's saying, you know what, I can't maybe heal the divide, but I'm going to do what I can in the remaining months I have.
His legacy is yet to be written, but thank you for a fascinating discussion. Al Rue and Jim Malone and Cindy Sain, of course, for sticking around. We are out of time for today, but we will be back again next week for our second edition of the Correspondents in 2016. In the meantime, stay up to date with the latest news from around the world. Just visit our website, voanews.com. Do check it out. And for everyone here at VOA, I am Mil Arcega, wishing all of you a Happy New Year. Until next time, so long from Washington.